Support for this program has been provided by the following: Robin Stuckey, Fine Furnishings and Interior Design since 1915, proudly supporting public broadcasting continuously since 1985. Edison State College, which opened its doors in 1962 and now serves 20,000 students. Edison State College. Discover your genius. Summerfield's Interior Design, creating designs with a personal touch, located on Central Avenue in downtown Naples. Woodward, Piers, and Lombardo, PA Attorneys at Law. 22 practice areas, focused on results in Naples and Marco Island. Cypress Cove, a nationally accredited continuing care retirement community situated on the Health Park campus in Fort Myers. And by Ding Darling Wildlife Society, Friends of the Refuge, supporting education and conservation programs at the J.N. Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge.
On the western edge of Florida's great swamp, the Everglades, beyond the sawgrass prairies of the famed River of Grass, is a cypress-studded marshland called the Big Cypress Swamp. The vast wet wilderness, a mosaic of marshes, cypress trees, pine lands, and prairies, was once slated to become the site of the world's largest jetport, a plan that launched bitter controversy, and a landmark conservation compromise that created the country's first national preserve. Unlike national parks, the new Big Cypress National Preserve would allow traditional uses of the land while protecting the swamp from development. The controversial compromise was brokered by unlikely allies, conservationists and hunters who understood that the swamp was more than a wet wasteland. It was the life-giving source of water for the western edge of the Everglades, and a soul-nourishing sanctuary for those who ventured into one of the last great wild places of the world, the Big Cypress Swamp.
I'd hate to think that this place wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be able to come, because it's part of my life and who I am. It's part of my culture. I'm grounded in this swamp. People find their spirituality and God in different ways, some in formal churches. I find God out here in the Big Cypress. I call this the Cypress Cathedral. It is holy. It is special.
This is the most beautiful and unique place in the world. This system hasn't been touched basically for 10,000 years. And to have a system that hasn't been touched for that long is pretty exciting. When you get into a system that's ancient, you get a restoration in your soul you can't get anywhere else.
The Big Cypress Swamp, named for the vast expanse of cypress trees that once stretched across nearly all of southwest Florida, has stirred passions for more than a century. Little was known of the Big Cypress until the 1800s, when soldiers during the Seminole Wars deemed the never-ending wilderness worthless. Few ventured into the massive marshland except to hunt. The rough region remained nearly impenetrable until 1928, when the Tamiami Trail opened the Big Cypress to development. While promoters saw rich possibilities, others saw a wilderness wonderland. Although attempts were made to include the wet wilderness in the new Everglades National Park, the entire Big Cypress Swamp was excluded from the park. Loggers moved into the Big Cypress and eventually harvested millions of board feet of cypress and pine.
There's always discussion about why it's called the Big Cypress. Parts of it did have enormous, 500-600 100-year-old cypress trees, old growth, most of them which were logged out in the 40s and 50s. Some people didn't want to preserve this place. They said it's just a second growth cutover swamp. But there were other people who said, no, it's magnificent.
Although aggressively logged, the Big Cypress swamp remained relatively intact, unlike the eastern Everglades.
I returned from the military service in 1960, and I found the changes in Florida were so dramatic from the time I had left in 1955. I could hardly believe it was the same state. The Corps of Engineers had completely changed the landscape. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of digging, diking, pumping had been going on, and the landscape of Florida was permanently changed.
The canals that drained and claimed land for development were draining away the lifeblood of the Everglades. Everglades National Park was drying up, and Florida's iconic alligators were on the brink of extinction. The booming 1960s also brought a new threat: the building of the world's largest supersonic jetport, just 6 miles north of Everglades National Park, in the heart of the Big Cypress swamp. The airport was slated to span 38 square miles and be bigger than the city of Miami. One flight training runway was built before conservationists could rally.
There was going to be all this attendant development that was going to spring up, another city in the Big Cypress, western Everglades region around this airport if it was built. People came together, the hunters, the airboaters, the swamp buggy owners, anybody that cared about conservation. We didn't think our chances were very good at stopping it, but that coalition of people made the difference.
President Nixon became involved and sent his Secretary of the Interior to evaluate the jetport project.
The president gave us his helicopter, which I must admit was a joyful experience because it was one of the first helicopters that was slightly soundproof. We had to refuel twice. That's how many hours we put in. We flew over all the Big Cypress, saw the beginning of the training field, and I pointed out to him what an outrage this was in the middle of the Big Cypress and what damage it would do if development occurred around the training field. We flew the edges. We saw the problems of getting water across Tamiami Trail to Florida Bay, the shortcoming of missing all the eastern part of the Everglades was still in private hands, because when the original park lines were created, they didn't know what the watershed was.
A new awareness of the delicate dynamics of the Everglades was dawning.
They wanted this project stopped because they recognized that it would disrupt the flow of water from the freshwater swamp into the coastal estuaries of the 10,000 islands. And the 10,000 islands would have changed vastly, and that area that's now a vital nursery for a variety of sport and commercial fish probably would have died.
Conservationists eventually won the battle to stop the jetport, but the war to protect the Big Cypress was far from over. The idea of permanently protecting the Big Cypress swamp met with strong resistance from old-timers who remembered and resented what happened to homesteaders, hunters, and commercial fishermen when Everglades National Park was established.
They told these people they had to leave and condemn their property. Because of that, many of the old families were very embittered towards the federal government and the National Park Service. So it soon became abundantly clear that if some of the conservation movement were going to try to make this an extension of Everglades National Park, it was not going to happen. There was too much local opposition. It wasn't going to happen a second time.
Conservationists began meeting with their opposition, landowners and hunters.
Eventually an agreement was made that we would have a different breed of cat, that they would not oppose this being a unit of the National Park Service, as long as they would be respected, their history, their culture, their rights, their traditional use, hunting, fishing, frogging, using off-road vehicles. If that would be addressed and guaranteed in the congressional legislation, they would not oppose establishing the preserve.
Congress authorized the creation of the Big Cypress National Preserve in 1974. The new preserve included more than 500,000 acres and was one of the largest federal land acquisition projects in history. For the first time, the National Park Service was charged with managing and protecting a vast wilderness, while allowing unprecedented uses including hunting, private camps, swamp buggies, airboats, even oil drilling. It would prove to be a monumental task and an ongoing challenge. In the water world of the Big Cypress Swamp, rain rules and fuels the vast wet wilderness.
The Big Cypress Swamp is considered a basin, so that means that there are no rivers or no waters or wetlands running into this basin. The water that's generated in the basin all comes from rainfall. The waters flowing through the river of grass evaporate, form large storm clouds during the summer months, and then the prevailing east to west winds push those clouds over to the Big Cypress Basin, and the rain falls back into the swamp.
The massive marshland is also formed by fire. Although lightning strikes still spark fires during the dry winter season, the preserve also does controlled burns to help mimic the natural cycle of the swamp.
We're fortunate that within Big Cypress National Preserve, we have one of the most proactive fire programs in the nation. And I think that for a long time, the mantra was, no forest fire. Smokey the Bear said, put out every forest fire, and when actually that was the wrong thing to do.
Every year, thousands of acres are intentionally burned, spurring new growth in the swampy savannas and ensuring a healthy habitat for a myriad of species, including one of the most endangered animals in the world, the Florida panther. Researchers currently estimate that there are only about 100 Florida panthers left in the wild.
If it weren't for the preserve, for Everglades National Park, for all the protected areas in South Florida, I would think that the panther would probably be extinct at this time.
To learn more about this struggling species, the National Park Service began a radio telemetry and monitoring project in the preserve in 2002.
In February, we have a month-long capture season. That is a time when the water levels are low, so it's safe to capture cats without having too much water.
The panthers are treed by specially trained hunting dogs, tranquilized, and gently lowered to the ground to receive a thorough health exam.
Handling a panther, of course, there's a lot of responsibility. We want everything to work out well, but there's always a time where we look at the animal. It's a beautiful animal, it's a healthy animal. To see such a large cat and realize that it's out here roaming freely is a wonderful thought.
Some of the panthers are fitted with radio collars, and these cats are tracked 3 times a week from a small plane with a special radio antenna.
And we get a location and habitat on them. With that information, we're learning how large their home ranges are, what types of habitats they use. With a collar on a female, we're able to determine when she begins to den. That means give birth to kittens.
When the kittens are about 2 weeks old and the mother leaves the den to go hunting, the panther team rushes in to examine the kittens.
And I haven't tasted it, but I'm told that it tastes like banana. When we're done with them, wish them the best, that they may grow up, make it through life, and reproduce here in Big Cypress. Big Cypress is unique because we've got that umbrella species. It's in an intact system, and that is something that I think a lot of people cherish.
The vast swamp still holds many secrets. Researchers recently began monitoring another rare resident of the swamp, the Big Cypress fox squirrel.
No one knows anything about these squirrels, and so we put collars on them. We're out tracking them, figure out their home range, their habitat use, their nesting. Outside of them being rare and a unique species to the Big Cypress Swamp, they're also an indicator species. They're depending upon the habitat being healthy. The more we can learn about fox squirrels and the greater their populations are is an indicator of the overall health of the ecosystem.
The tracking program has revealed new details about the secret lives of these squirrels.
After we collared the squirrels, we found out that they go to nest. We had no idea what their nests look like or anything. So far, in 15 square miles around here, we have 250 nests. Hopefully, we'll be able to figure out what their requirements are and how we can manage the habitat to help them out.
Managing the diverse habitats of the preserve includes the never-ending task of removing non-native species that can devastate the natural environment. More than 1,000 non-native plant species live within the preserve, including an import from Australia that once threatened to overwhelm the entire Big Cypress Swamp, Melaleuca.
It was planted in a lot of people's yards in the 50s and 60s. It also apparently was introduced with the idea of helping to drain the Everglades and transpire water from the soil. We've taken out about 16 million trees so far.
Removing exotic plants from the preserve helps protect nearly 100 native plants listed as threatened or endangered.
It's very important because this is the last holdout for a lot of these populations. A lot of the area simply hasn't been explored very much. There's a good chance there's other things that will be found in the future.
Within the still wild swamp are surprising signs of one of the most controversial activities allowed in the preserve, oil drilling.
The preserve would not have been created unless this compromise was made. One of the largest landowners within the preserve was the Collier family. When the land deal went through, the agreement with Congress was that the landowners would retain their subsurface rights. The Collier family was actually exploring and producing oil in Florida well before the creation of the preserve.
Oil was first discovered in the northern reaches of the Big Cypress Swamp in 1943. The Sunnyland oil field became Florida's first commercial oil field. Further exploration of what was dubbed the Sunnyland Tract revealed more promise in the swamp.
It transects Big Cypress from the northwest corner of the preserve down through toward the southeastern portion of the preserve. It's approximately 12 miles wide and 125 miles long. And all of the fields that have been discovered in South Florida have been discovered along that Sunnyland trend.
Several fields were discovered within the preserve, and exploration continues along the Sunnyland Tract.
There's 9 pads in Big Cypress National Preserve, and they range from a little over an acre to about 6 acres in size. There's been several million barrels of oil that's been produced in Big Cypress, and currently it fluctuates between 30 and 50,000 barrels a month of production. Somewhere around 400,000 to 500,000 barrels a year. There's approximately 117 acres that's been impacted by oil and gas exploration in the history of the preserve. So that's less than 1% of the total land area of the preserve.
The landmark conservation compromise that allowed oil drilling in the preserve also allowed nearly 200 property owners to retain private property within the federally owned land.
Some of them are year-round residents, some of them are traditional Miccosukee and Seminole family sites, and a large majority of them are backcountry hunting or recreation camps. So the private landowners, for the most part, retain 3 acres of their land and the ability to keep their property as long as it had some type of structure on it. They have complete rights to them.
Most of the private backcountry camps are used only during the winter season, when hunting for white-tailed deer, turkey, and hogs is allowed in the preserve.
If you want to be a deer hunter, Big Cypress isn't a place to get a deer. It just isn't. You know, it's everything else involved. It's just the freedom, the having this piece of property, having something to look forward to come to be isolated like this. We're basically 14 miles from an asphalt road where we're sitting right now. It's pretty secluded, and that's pretty special because there's not many places left in and particularly in South Florida where you can make that claim.
It's used for an escape and solitude more than anything else. Now, during the cooler months and the hunting season, that's when the cypress gets the most use.
Most of the privately owned camps are only accessible by off-road vehicles.
We allow swamp buggies, ATVs, street legal 4x4s in one area of the preserve, and airboats in another area of the preserve. We allow for 2,000 permitted vehicles annually.
Slow-moving swamp buggies, invented by hunters in the 1920s, are used primarily in the drier northern sections of the preserve, while airboats are the only vehicles capable of traversing the deep water prairies to the south. The controversial decision to allow ATVs and other non-traditional vehicles into the swamp has spurred new restrictions and debate in the preserve.
People used to go on public lands and just go anywhere that they wanted to, but we recognize that that does cause some impacts, and so to mitigate those impacts, it's required that we go to a trail system.
Now we have Jeep clubs, four-wheeler clubs, and they just like to mud or race around. You know, it's not the type of environment for that because they're tearing the place up.
The struggle to balance protection of the environment while allowing access and use of the preserve continues to challenge policymakers.
Some of the restrictions are being forced on the preserve by different groups. A lot of the local people don't understand, but Big Cypress is constantly being sued over something. It gets to be a struggle between what use people want out of the preserve.
Although the preserve now encompasses nearly half of the 2,000 square mile Big Cypress swamp, few people ever experience the hard-to-reach heart of this vast, wet wilderness. Most visitors see the Big Cypress National Preserve through a car window.
It is hard to measure the visitation to the preserve because unlike a lot of national park units that have a very distinct entrance point, we have a variety of entrance points. The majority of the visitors that come to the preserve travel along US 41 and they take advantage of wildlife viewing areas that we have, or maybe they drive scenic roads like the Loop Road or the Turner River Road.
Visitation is highest during the cool, dry winter months, when the mosquito population is at its lowest. Nearly 40 different species of mosquitoes are found in the Everglades. Alligators and snakes, including several poisonous species, add to the menacing mystique of the swamp.
This is a very inhospitable place, or at least a lot of people think that it's an inhospitable place. Visitors look at you sort of strangely when you say you can go walking anywhere you want, and they say, well, but it's flooded with water. But one of the best experiences is to go off onto the Loop Road and go walking out into the cool water. It's incredibly clear, and you just walk in maybe a quarter mile or so, and you don't hear any human noises whatsoever. The majority of people who come to South Florida, I think that they look at this place as being that dark, scary swamp. And actually, when you get out into it, you'll discover that it's an amazing, wild place.
Those who enter the forbidding forest are rewarded with a glimpse of an ancient, still wild world.
I was scared to death to get off the road. I was expecting this New Jersey type swamp, I guess, you know, mucky and gooey, and I didn't expect this pristine, crystal clear water that you can see through. I was shocked. And ever since then, we've been walking through the Cypress. Since 1984, I have never met another person. Because there are no trails here. You just go, like most parks have trails. A lot of people are very uncomfortable getting into the Big Cypress. And by having these photographs, it gives people a kind of an idea about what the Big Cypress is. My pictures are really to draw you in, is to give you the experience of the Big Cypress in air conditioning. I make them big so you can experience the spots, because this is a subtle thing. It's more of an experience. The Big Cypress is a unique place in the world. You're not going to find anything like this anywhere in the world. People coming through here don't realize how special it is. And hopefully with my photographs, it gives them a concept of how special it is.
The Big Cypress still daunts and delights those who dare to enter this primeval place.
I brought people out here and say, well, I don't know what you see in this place, but I think you either love this place or you don't.
The massive, mysterious, and magnificent marshland continues to inspire deep passions for one of the last great wild places of the world, the Big Cypress Swamp.
The Park Service has realized that although they're more difficult to manage, preserves have their place, and the local people continue to feel, proprietary ownership and interest in it. It belongs to everyone, all of us, but those of us that are so much a part of our life, in our culture and who we are, it's kind of our benchmark. It's more important than just a place to go and see a woodpecker or something. It's just part of who we are. And it goes real deep.
To purchase a copy of this and other WGCU produced programs, go to WGCU.org or call 1-888-824-0030.